Anytime we're dealing with a subject as difficult as temptation, it's great to start with the scripture. And a scripture that really speaks about God's desire to help us overcome temptation can be found in Titus chapter 2, verses 11 through 14. And I'm reading from the Message that says the following. God's readiness to give and forgive is now public. Salvation is available for everyone. We're being shown how to turn our backs on a godless, indulgent life and how to take on a God-filled, God-honoring life. This new life is starting right now and is whetting our appetites for the glorious day when our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, appears. He offered himself as a sacrifice to free us from a dark, rebellious life into this good, pure life, making us a people he can be proud of, energetic in goodness. This passage is really encouraging, and it makes it clear that God really believes that we can overcome temptation. So that gives me a lot of hope. Now, as we go into this topic, I want to give you two states of mind to consider. One is, don't be shocked. We're all human, and we are all going to be tempted. The Bible says that. Temptation is a normal part of life, and we should not be surprised when that happens. On the other hand, I submit that you don't want to become complacent either. It's very easy to assume that we've got this and that things are under control, and temptation really can catch us in those moments when we are most relaxed and unaware of how much at risk we are. So somewhere between there is an appropriate place to be. Vigilant without being shocked about the fact that temptation is a very real factor in our lives. Today in this talk, I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to talk about temptation's methods, where it comes from, how it works, what it does, and the sources that it comes from. And then secondly, I'm going to give you some practical strategies that I've used to help actually resist temptation. So first, where it comes from, and then secondly, how to fight it. So let's get started on dealing with these sources of temptation. What my desire is to really reveal where these things come from, to pull back the covers and to actually show you temptation's underwear, just to reveal how it works in us, and so that we can be wiser and more aware of the strategies that temptation pulls on us. So there are three primary sources of temptation I'm going to talk about. They're all found in a passage in 1 John 2:16. And so I'll start out each section by giving you the name of the temptation, or what John calls it. I will then talk about where it comes from in terms of what the instinct or the reflex is that we have. There's an impulse or a reflex that is healthy, but when temptation comes along, it can exploit that and use that in a negative way. So I'll talk about what the instinctive reflex is. Then I'll be talking about what causes it, what makes us actually more prone to it, things that are make us more vulnerable, so that when we have these needs, we are more likely to fall. I'll be talking about how Jesus faced each of these three types of temptation while he was in the desert. As it says in Hebrews 2:18, he was tempted just like we were. And so Christ faced all three of these temptation types while in the desert, while he was fasting in the desert. I'll also share with you another biblical example. In this case, a negative example where someone in the Bible was tempted in this way and failed. I'm also going to share a way this plays out in my life, a personal example, if you will, a place where I struggle with this source of temptation. And then finally, I'll have kind of what I call a tagline at the end, just kind of a slogan by which you can remember this particular type of temptation or a source of temptation. So let's roll. The first type of temptation, 1 John calls it the lust of the flesh. Now, it's important to realize that lust of the flesh is not just talking about sex. It's talking about all kinds of things. Some of them are physical, but not even just necessarily physical gratification. So let me explain. It is caused by a desire for comfort and pleasure and control. It's kind of about wanting to be able to meet my own needs and to mediate how I feel about life, how comfortable I am, how much I'm enjoying it, how much I have a sense that I am on top of things. It's about wanting to be in charge and to be able to control how I feel. It can be caused or can be exacerbated by stress, pain, unpleasant emotions, being convicted, having unresolved problems, internal conflict, and anxiety. Just emotional distress of various kinds can just make me a lot more prone to being tempted by the lust of the flesh. Christ faced it in the desert when Satan told him, "Turn stone into bread." Now, of course, Jesus was very hungry. He hadn't eaten for 40 days, and he had a very physical need for hunger. And the temptation here was not so much that he wasn't supposed to be hungry, but he was looking to meet his own needs instead of letting God be the source who was going to meet his needs. This temptation is when we don't like the way God is doing things. We want to meet needs our own way. And we don't particularly like the speed or the pace or the way in which God is meeting these needs. The other biblical example is found in Genesis 16, the first 2 chapters, and it goes on from there. Abraham was the father of Israel, the nation of Israel, and to some extent of our faith. And God had promised him a son through his wife Sarah, who was very well advanced in age. And as time passed and she failed to conceive, Sarah became anxious and told Abraham to go with her maidservant, and to have a child by that means, basically to help God out. And so Abraham indeed did lay with her maidservant and conceive a child named Ishmael. And that was not how God wanted to do this. God wanted to bear a child through Sarah and had told him that. But Abraham was uncomfortable, and Sarah too, with how long it was taking, and they tried to meet their own needs. I've often used the term Ishmaelism as a sin of when I try to do things that I don't feel like God is doing fast enough or thorough enough. Now, one of the ways that this particular source of temptation plays out in my life is a desire to do something when I'm feeling uncomfortable, when I'm stressed or anxious. It seems to really come a lot when I'm financially anxious, and I've got a lot of stress around that. And in past times, I would fall into some addictive behaviors that I'm really grateful are no longer my default mechanism. But the way I seem to fall apart now is to find myself stuck in a long spate of playing computer games. I call it a solitaire stupor, and I will spend long times just playing these games, just trying to feel better about my life, instead of doing something that I should be doing, something productive, or even going to bed. It's just a way that I find myself satisfying the lust of the flesh, trying to feel better about the way my situation is. So the tagline, we stop relying on God. The lust of the flesh is when we are tempted to try to take care of things by ourselves and not to allow God to meet our needs. So that's the first source of temptation, the lust of the flesh. The next one is referred to as the lust of the eyes. And this is a lot more than just what you see. St. Augustine does a really great job of explaining these various sources of temptation in his Confessions. And he talks about the verb to see. And it is interesting that in Latin and I guess other languages, and certainly in English, the word see is a generic word for all the senses, or for perceiving. So while seeing is certainly applying to visual things, see this pretty picture that is hanging up here, it also can be applied to other senses. See if you like the way the soup tastes, or see if you enjoy the smell of this perfume, see how this feels, see if you like this new record album. Really, those don't make any sense because we're not using the sense of sight, but we use the sense of sight as a generic term for perceiving. And so the lust of the eyes is something that's based on the things that we see, that we experience, that come our way. So what is the reflex here? Well, human beings are curious and they want adventure. God has made us that way. There's something about us that really seems to want to explore things, to have a sense of excitement. God has programmed that in us. That is not wrong, but that can be exploited. The triggers that can cause this is when we're bored, or when we're, for whatever reason, ignoring God. I've also found that when I'm in a place of being very ungrateful, I can be more susceptible to this type of temptation. When my priorities are miscued and I am failing to focus on the things that I should, that can also be a problem. And finally, focusing on negatives, that can also be a place where I am more susceptible to this kind of temptation. So it has to do with kind of where my mindset is at. Let's look at Jesus and how he dealt with this. The thing that Satan said to him was, see if God will catch you. Satan had brought him to a cliff of some kind and told him that the scripture said that if he jumped, the angels would catch him. And Satan was saying, go test it. Well, that's a place of curiosity and adventure, I would say. And Jesus, of course, came right back and said, you should not tempt the Lord your God. He knew that that was not a way of honoring God, and that was not what he should be doing. But let's look at how another biblical example where that happened. Well, the very first sin. Eve in the garden was tempted by Satan in Genesis 3. She saw the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it wasn't so much that that fruit was so incredibly wonderful, because there were dozens and dozens of fruit trees all over the garden. It was that Satan said, you will learn what good and evil is. And she was curious and wanted to gain that sense of adventure. And so her sin was wanting to know something that she really, frankly, did not need to know. And that cost her, and that cost Adam when he followed suit. And that cost all of us greatly. So the sin here is where you're focusing on something that is not something you're supposed to focus on. A personal example for me, very simply, is when in my morning routine, before I wake up, I have a commitment to spending time with God. But very often I'm tempted to just take a look at my email first. Let me just see what's out there and see if there's something I can deal with quickly. I'm just curious. And what often happens is that I will spend quite a lot of time doing that initial email check, and suddenly, magically, I seem to not have enough time for my devotions. I seem to have forfeited my chance to be with God because I was curious about who emailed me what. And of course, most of the time, there was nothing of significance there that I needed to check into. But nonetheless, I felt obligated to do so. Perhaps you're not sure if this source of temptation is as valid as I'm saying. Well, check this out. I don't know where you're sitting, but right now, do not look at the ceiling. If you're like me, you're probably trying not to look at the ceiling right now. There's something about us that is just curious, when you know, of course, there's nothing particularly strange on the ceiling, and there's nothing to look at, but you're probably struggling not to look at that. That's how this source of temptation works. It just gets the curiosity that we have, and we find ourselves overcome with a desire, a need to follow suit with that temptation. So finally, the tagline on this, the motto for this particular one, we stop seeking God. We seek other things, we look for other things to satisfy our curiosity, and we take our focus off of God. And that's the source of this temptation. The third source of temptation is called the pride of life. And this source of temptation comes from a need for self-acceptance and social acceptance. We are social creatures, and we are also creatures that really want to feel like our lives have meaning and that we're of value. There's nothing wrong with this. God put that in us. That's the way we are created. However, the points of trigger and the danger points can be when we compare ourselves to others, or when I focus on my failures, or I focus on others' success. St. Augustine talks about this when he describes it in his Confessions. He says basically, this is the desire to be feared and loved of men with no other view than that I may find in it a joy. What he's saying is that this source of temptation is where I want people to be impressed with me, and I want to feel good about who I am just because that's what I want. Not to give God glory or to be connected with people or to be of use, but just because it makes me feel good. And so when I compare myself to others, or when I am worried about how I compare, then I'm not really looking at what I can do, but just seeing how I stand with other people. Did Jesus face it? Oh yeah, he did. Satan brought him to all the kingdoms of the world, and said to him, all of this can be yours if you'll just worship me. And what Satan was doing was saying that you will have this great status. Now, of course, he was already the Son of God, and so it's kind of a moot point, but Satan was trying to work it, and was saying that you could have all of this if you'll just worship me. You will be esteemed by all men and seen as the greatest ever. And that was what he was trying to tap into. A biblical example is from the book of Acts, the early church, now the chapter 5. There was a couple by the name of Ananias and Sapphira. This was at a time in the early church where people were giving away a lot of their possessions so that the entire body could have their needs met. And so some folks were selling possessions and laying the money at the apostles' feet. Ananias and Sapphira had a piece of property, and they did indeed sell it, and they brought some of it to the apostles for distribution with the saints. There was nothing wrong with them doing that. What they did do is they kept a part of that. Let's say they gave half, we'll say. And then they kept the other half for themselves. Well, that wasn't wrong. That was their prerogative. However, what they did is they said that they'd given all of it, and so they lied about their generosity. So the sin was in their lying, not in their holding it back. And God did not like that one bit. But here this was stimulated by a desire to impress the other Christians around them, to be seen in high esteem, to be heroic, and to be seen as great. They were probably looking at the other people who had given their entire possessions, and maybe they were too afraid to give all that they had, but they wanted to be looked in the same stature. Either way, God was not pleased with that decision, and things ended quite badly for both Ananias and Sapphira. You can read about that in Acts chapter 5. So this is basically a thing of my anxiety about how people see me or how I am in the world. It is my desire to either feel great about myself or to know that you feel great about me. How it works for me? I'm a musician. I've played in lots of different settings and different bands and different groups, and I've studied and I have a degree in music. And there's some things that I do pretty well and some things that other people do a lot better than me. I get into trouble when I become anxious about what other people can do better than I can, or how well I can do what I can do. And I find myself often anxious, filled with anxiety about how people perceive my musicianship. When I'm around people who are really good, I get kind of stressed. When I'm around people who are not as good, I can get a sense of self-glorification and feeling very smug about myself. In both of these cases, I am falling into the temptation of a pride of life. And rather than just being content with the gifts that my God has given me and where I am, and being committed to continually improving, but comfortable with where I stand, I'm really worried about what you think of me, and hoping that you're very impressed with me. And also hoping that I can feel very good about how I stand before you and other people. So, what's the motto here? Very simply, we stop worshiping God. We're either worshiping ourselves or what we believe the image of ourselves is, or how people feel about us. But we are no longer wanting God to get all the glory. It's really wanting to receive some of the glory for ourselves. We stop worshiping God. So there you have it, folks. 3 sources of temptation. You've got the lust of the flesh, where we stop relying on God. You've got the lust of the eyes, where we stop seeking God. And you've got finally the pride of life, where we stop worshiping God. Well, after that, I think it's probably time for another scripture, just as we face strategies and look at how we're going to address these sources of temptation that come at us. So a passage that's very well known is in 1 Corinthians 10. 13th verse says, "No temptation has seized you except what is common to man. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. And this is a passage that I've often been frustrated by, because I've been in places and situations where I have felt like the temptation was much stronger than I could face. But in retrospect and in reviewing, I realized that there was a point where I could have escaped back a ways, so that by the time the actual moment of decision came, yes, it may have been too late, but it often was because I failed to take advantage of an escape that God gave me some stage back a ways. So God is faithful, and that has been my experience, and I'm grateful for that. So let's look at some of the strategies. Now, I've become a fan of Star Trek. My wife is a Star Trek fan from the beginning, and she's sort of infested me with fascination with that culture and that system. And so I've taken some of the way I'm organizing these strategies based on the Star Trek world. And in the Federation of Planets, they have something called prime directives. Now, I'm actually not sure if I even know what the second prime directive is. The first one is to not interfere with culture's development or something like that. But when it comes to overcoming temptation, I'm going to give you 4 prime directives. These are the ones that are just the most important things to keep in mind at all times. So the first one is off the fence. And I'll detail this a little bit later. But basically, the challenge here is that there are areas of our lives or actions that we do, patterns that we fall into, that we have not really made a decision as to whether we're going to say, no, I shouldn't do that, or that's permissible to me. And so rather than getting into whether it's right or wrong, I'm just asking you to make a decision. I said to a young man quite a while ago, sitting on a fence really hurts you in a certain part of your body. And failing to make that decision puts you in a place of pretty decent trauma and pain. So Whatever the issues are you're facing, get off the fence. Make a decision one way or the other. Is it right? Is it wrong? Just get off the fence. Second prime directive, shut the door. And this is pretty simple. Basically what I'm saying here is that there are situations where you find you're more likely to be tempted, and all you need to do is put yourself in a place where you don't face those. You can shut the door. You can actually remove them from your field of vision or whatever, and find yourself in a position where you're no longer as strongly tempted. I've often had the experience of commuting on the subway on my way to somewhere, and there's a station called Ashmont Station, which is the first stop on the Red Line, and it's outdoors. And so the train will pull up, open the doors, people will get in, and then the train will sit there for 5 or 10 minutes before it actually pulls out of the station, waiting for the scheduled time for it to leave. And while it's sitting there, the doors are wide open, which is no problem in the spring and early fall and in the summer. Well, it's a little bit of a problem in the summer, but in the winter, it's a real problem because it's cold. And even though the heat may be blasting on the subway cars, the doors are wide open and the cold is getting in. And until the doors finally shut and the train pulls out of the station, that car is just not going to get really warm. Well, it can be the same with temptation. As long as we're keeping the door open to those temptations so that they are in full view and full access to us, we're going to have a lot more trouble resisting them. And so the prime directive here is to, whenever possible, just remove that temptation from the sight of vision and sight of experience, our experience. Again, I'll be more specific later. The third one is plug it in. This is very simple. I've often heard people say about certain strategies, well, that didn't work for me. And then I would often ask them, well, did you try it? In a lot of cases, people would not have actually tried it. They had already made a decision that was not going to work, or they had simply just talked about doing something but not actually applied it. It's not very different from me taking one of my keyboards and attaching it to an amp and just pressing a bunch of buttons and then expecting sound without plugging it in. It's really important that I actually connect it to something that's actually going to work. And my challenge here is when I share these strategies with you in a few minutes, these are not ideas, these are not principles, these are actual action steps that I'm suggesting you actually do. So plug it in means actually turn the thing on and work it. And the last one is stay on board. Some of these strategies may take a while before they kick in. Some of them may not work at first. Some of them may not work at all. But I'm asking you, back on my train analogy, to give it a while before you say, oh, it doesn't work. Try it for a period of time, a week or two, or even a month if that's appropriate, before you say, well, this one isn't for me. Not every strategy that I'm going to suggest will work for you. Of course not. But I'm asking to give it some time before you actually reject it. So those are your prime directives. Off the fence, shut the door, plug it in, and please stay on board. So let's look at these strategies. The first group of strategies I call Resistance Academy. These are structures and groundwork that you put in place, direction for recovery work. These are just sort of general things that you need to get started on and have kind of as a precondition if you're going to really be successful against dealing with temptation. For example, identify exactly what you want to change and settle it. This is hearkening back to the off-the-fence prime directive. And this needs to be done on every behavior that you face. And so here I'm asking you to think about what are the areas of temptation that you most strongly need to deal with. Now I have a friend who is allergic to almonds. Not just mildly allergic, but severely allergic, as in if he has something with almonds, he needs to go to the emergency room and he may die. He's severely allergic. Now for him, eating something with almonds is stupid. One might argue it's sinful. For me, not a problem. I have no allergy to almonds. I like them. They taste fine. And so for me, it's not an issue. Here's my point. What may be a problem for you may not be a problem for me, and vice versa. The only thing that I'm responsible for is really before God determining what I need to work on and what I need to include in my lifestyle and what I need to exclude from my lifestyle. So I'm asking you here to figure out what your almonds are and to avoid them, and to decide to avoid them. Secondly, for any of us who are facing a severe temptation, for example, an addiction or some other kind of besetting sin, you're going to need to make some time and space to really focus on this. Recovering from a deeply ingrained habit that is troubling and that you want to change can take a lot of energy and a lot of time. And so to be in a place where you're very busy and undergoing a lot of different things, it's going to be very difficult for you to take that same time to conquer this type of temptation. So I'm suggesting that you're going to need to make space. Along with that, I have found it extremely helpful to have people in my life who can walk with me. It's helpful for me to have mentors. Those are folks who've had some success and who are further along than I am in this particular struggle, and a study group, by which I mean folks who are at the same level or even a little bit less further along than I am. Folks who can be peers to help me as I attempt to really address whatever the particular issue is. One of the most helpful strategies I've used is to take the issues of not yielding to a temptation, take the benefits of that, and to write them down. So if I find that when I don't fall into this temptation, there are some really good things that happen in my life. When I do fall into temptation, some really bad things happen in my life, I need to write those down on a piece of paper and even memorize them if I can, or hang that on my mirror or keep it in my wallet, so that when I am tempted, I can pull that piece of paper out and remember those things. Now, this is actually something I had a lot of trouble getting a picture of this, but this is something known as a BIF. And every human being has a BIF in them. It stands for built-in forgetter. Let me explain how it works. Let's say on Friday night, you're in a situation where you are tempted to do something and you do that something. This is not the first time you've done it. You've done it many times and you hate it when you do this. And immediately after you do this, you remember why you hated it and you feel just awful about it. Saturday morning, you still are filled with regret. Into Sunday, you still can barely get yourself through church. You're feeling so bad. And then sometime around the middle of the week, this temptation comes up again and you cannot remember why you don't want to do it. That's the BIF. It works really well. And so this suggestion about documenting the benefits, that's the anti-BIF antidote. BIF antidote. So when you can't remember why you don't want to do something, you can just pull out that piece of paper and look at it. And there, in black and white or whatever color you used, is the reasons why you don't want to do such and such. And the cool thing about it is it's not someone else telling you this. It's not even a scripture verse telling you this. It's what you told you. Who are you going to argue with now? You are now arguing with yourself. You now have the ability to remember why this was such a bad idea. There have been times where that has really helped me out a lot. Next, study your vulnerability and learn from others. So if you have a particular way that you find yourself yielding to temptation, learn about it. If it's an addiction, find out the details of other people who struggle with this addiction and learn. Learn strategies, learn where it may come from. Just learn anything you can about this. Become smart. Become smarter than your temptation, if you will. And learn from others who have also succeeded. And then finally, start working on your major underlying issues. One of the things that causes us to be tempted are those triggers, but there's also those places in our lives where we haven't dealt with some things. And so counseling and therapy and other things may be really helpful in addressing these. I'll talk about these some more. This will come around in my next group of strategies as well. So that's Resistance Academy. But let me move on now. Routine maintenance. These are kind of ongoing habits that are really important for a new lifestyle. These are the kind of things that we do just because we have to do them. They're not particularly glamorous. They're not particularly fun. And nobody probably even notices if we don't do them, but they're really important. It's kind of like tightening the bolts all around a ship. If someone failed to do that from engineering on a starship, eventually there would be a real problem, a mechanical failure. And so there are certain habits that I've found have been helpful for my life that I may be able to skip one day or two, but if I continue to ignore them, there's going to be a problem. So one is to acknowledge my powerlessness and dependence on God every day. It is really important for me to recognize that without God's help, I cannot resist temptation. And so every day, I need to spend some time before God recognizing that reality. Deliberately connecting with God is also really important. And so I need to take some time to actually make a connection with my higher power, with my Lord, and to recognize that He is with me. If I don't do that every day on a regular basis, I'm going to be much more prone to temptation. And so then there's the need to make a decision daily. Let's say that I've identified a particular behavior or a series of behaviors. Every day is really important for me to make a decision. Am I going to do this or am I not going to do this? And so that's something that I need to do very intentionally. It's much easier to fall into temptation when I haven't already made a commitment to not go that particular direction. It's a little bit harder to fall into temptation when I've already made a decision to go the opposite way and now I have to do a 180. Practice routine, ongoing routines of accountability. So I've had over the years different routines where I would talk to somebody or email somebody and we would exchange a commitment to each other to have that day be a day where we try to do the things that we've decided we want to do and try not to do the things we've decided we don't want to do. For me, it's as standard as my morning cup of coffee. I do it whether I'm feeling good. I do it whether I'm feeling bad. I do it if it rains, if it's sunny. I just do it because that's just what I do. And it's been really helpful to be in the presence of somebody else and making that commitment. Disown ambivalence and gray areas. Remember I talked about settling? And so this is the place where there may be some areas of behavior that I've kind of decided I don't want to do, but now I'm not so sure if I want to stick with that course. This is the time to just every day say, you know what? I said I wasn't going to do this. Or I said this is what I was going to try to do. I'm going to stick with it. So this is the time to disown that ambivalence. And I may need to set some boundaries and safeguards. So it may be that on this particular day I need to avoid doing certain things. I mentioned shutting the door earlier. And this is something that I need to look at and review frequently. It may be that something that was a problem before is no longer a problem, or vice versa, something that never was a problem has become a problem. But I need to look at ways to set my life in order so that I am not in a place where I'm going to be more tempted than others. And I need to review that frequently. Along with it, there are certain times where I am more vulnerable than others. And AA has an acronym HALT, which stands for hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. So when I am one of these four things, I am a lot more vulnerable and susceptible to temptation. When I'm fasting or just had a fight with somebody, or if I'm in a strange city by myself, or if I've had to stay up late working on a project, in all those four scenarios, my likelihood of being strongly tempted increases. And so I need to be aware of that. And there may be also other challenging and dangerous situations. For example, when someone's spouse may go out of town, that may be a time where one might be more prone to doing foolish things because of a lack of connection and accountability. I need to know and look at my schedule and see, okay, at such and such a time, this is going to be a bit more difficult, and I'm going to need to think about what to do. Business trips used to be really hard for me. And so one of the ways I dealt with this is I would actually, on any business trip I took, I would take something with me to do for those nights when I got back to the hotel. One of the things I took was a jigsaw puzzle, which I love. And so knowing I had a jigsaw puzzle meant that I wasn't going to be tempted to surf the TV for something that I would regret watching. So anticipate those times and figure out what you're going to do about them. So these are ongoing habits that I try to keep to help me resist temptation. And then finally, it's really important to stay mindful and grateful for past victories. God has been really good and helped me to resist temptation in the past, and being aware of that helps me feel more hopeful about resisting today. So staying mindful and grateful for what God has done in the past sets my mindset in a more positive light for today. Moving on to what I call code red. This is when the alarm sounds and there's an attack happening. It's when you're tempted or when things are extremely stressful and you know you're very susceptible. Here's the things that I suggest you do. First of all, know that you're in trouble. It's very easy to minimize the severity of the temptation or the stress level. Far more trouble has come to me by underestimating how severe my situation was. Very little trouble has come to me by overestimating it. So it's better to be safe than sorry. Don't minimize how severe your situation is. Along with that, cry out to God for help. Don't deny the feelings I'm having, but just to be aware of what I'm feeling and the fact that I am in distress. And ask God to help me in that. Call for help. Sound an alarm. In other words, reach out to people. Some of my best friends often will get an email from me with just this in the title, Bill in Trouble. And they will know immediately to pray for me, to get back to me, and to find out what's going on, or to just speak into my life in ways that can help me get through this. But I reach out and I call for help. As soon as I'm aware that things are bad, it's time to get some help. And it's so much better just to face these in the company of other people who care about you and want to help you through it. Something else that can be really helpful is just to do something positive. It doesn't matter what you do. You can call a friend who you haven't talked to in a while. You can pick up trash outside. You can clean up the top of your desk. It doesn't matter what you do, but just do something positive. So often temptations can be averted by just getting busy with something else. And obviously you want to get busy with something that's good, but by doing that, you often can stave off the temptation that you're facing. Sometimes we're in a position where we are in a situation that's very tempting, and the best strategy is to get the heck out of there. Joseph had this experience when he was tempted by Potiphar, his master's wife. She wanted him to sleep with him, and he didn't want to dishonor his master. And when she was very persuasive, Joseph just plain ran. He left. He didn't analyze. He didn't have a conversation. He just booked out of there. And sometimes that's exactly what I have to do. For some of my friends who are tempted at looking at things on the internet they shouldn't, I've often had to say to them, step away from the computer, walk out of the room, just get out of there. And that's often been a strategy that's helped us. Raise your Ebenezer. What is an Ebenezer? An Ebenezer is a term that means a stone of remembrance. Basically, remember how God has been faithful to you. Try to think of some gratitudes that have happened in the last few days. I often just try to remember how I'm thankful for God. I have a thing that I call stop, drop, and give me 10. What I will do is, in the middle of a temptation or a time of stress, I'll just name 10 things that I'm grateful to God for. 10 things. It doesn't matter what they're about. They're specific things, not just that he saved my soul many years ago, but very specific things like the fact that I got paid more than I expected for something, or that I found something I'd lost, or the fact that somebody said something very nice to me, or whatever. I look for some gratitudes, and I just name them. I have found that it's very hard to intentionally turn your back on God while you're saying thank you. And I don't like doing that. It really goes against my desire to enjoy a temptation and to enjoy sinning, but I find it really works. And then look for underlying causes. A lot of times our temptations are caused by something else that's going on in our lives, something which we need to redress, some area that we haven't done something about, or a mistake that we've made, or just some things that are happening in our lives. Ask God, what's going on? What is causing this? Why am I feeling this way? Again, for me, I'm more tempted when I'm financially stressed. So I may need to look at that and to ask God for some strategies around there. Or there may be other situations where there's something that's bothering you and making you more prone to be tempted. One specific manifestation of that is what I call loose connections. This is where there's a relationship that is broken down. Where my connection with somebody who I care about or somebody who's in my life, there's been a problem. When that happens, I am so much more prone to being stupid. And I've been in situations where I was wondering, where is this coming from? And then I realized I'd had an argument or a disagreement with a certain person, and I needed to resolve that. So those loose connections can really be a source of stress and add to the intensity of the temptation situation. So that's code red. That's when things are in danger and we need to get some help. My last category is what I call damage control. And this will be in two different situations. One, it'll be when I have failed, when I have fallen into temptation and failed to resist, or when I may have succeeded, but it was just really hard to get through that time. And it was a difficult situation. I still need to look and see what damage was done. Just like a starship may survive a battle with a Klingon or whatever the enemy of the day is, it will still have to look at the damage control and see what was actually injured in that process. So in the case where I have failed or where I put myself in a situation that was more difficult than I needed to, I need to go to God and really ask His forgiveness. I need to acknowledge fully how I got here, what I did, how I failed to take advantage of the tools that He's given me, and just acknowledge what happened. I need to know His wrath, His sorrow. God hurts when we sin. It hurts Him. I need to know His wrath, because there is anger that He feels, and His love, because He does love us. And there needs to be a process of grief. It needs to be an emotional experience. When we sin, when we fail, there is emotional collateral that happens. And we need to be aware of what God has experienced, and also just to experience it for ourselves. Having done that, we need to accept His forgiveness. God said in 1 John that He is faithful to forgive our sins if we confess them. And I found far more difficult than accepting God's forgiveness is actually forgiving myself. This is just as important. We need to give ourselves the same grace that God has given us, and to forgive ourselves. Not to ignore or to minimize our failure, but to actually extend grace to our fallen natures. One thing that's really important is to disclose to another person really quickly. AA has a really wonderful slogan which says, "We are as sick as our secrets." And what they mean is that if there's some things that we've done that we've not told anybody, that particular event or situation has kind of an ownership of us. It has the ability to stick in our craw and to actually get inside of us. And we're more prone to do it again. But when we disclose to another person, we really minimize its power. We allow it to be in the light, and it doesn't have the same kind of control over us. We need to take some time to see what the underlying need was. Why was I so tempted? Why did I fail? Or why was it so difficult? Often it may have been something that I should have checked out before, an underlying cause, a relational breakdown, or some other issue. So look and see what was causing it, what put me here. Empty hidden bottles. Perhaps I'm still trying to get away with certain things, and so I may have said, well, I won't do this and I won't do this, but I will do this. Hidden bottles are when alcoholics would store a bottle of whiskey or rum in a very hidden place that they thought no one else would ever find. Not even necessarily with the plan to drink it, but just wanting to know it was there, that somehow had a measure of comfort. What are the hidden bottles that I've had? And then trace back to the point of a decision or a failure to make a decision. I like to say, do a CSI on this. Look back, where was the point where I made a choice or failed to make a choice that put me in this situation? Often I will find that may have been something that was hours before the temptation or even a day before. Or it may have been some routine maintenance that I had dropped doing, and now I'm more prone. So just trace back and see where it was. Learn from my mistakes. And it may be necessary to redraw my boundaries. Remember I mentioned having clear boundaries of where I feel safe and where I feel like I can be in a place where I won't be overly tempted. Well, maybe I got it wrong, and maybe I need to re-examine where I can go, what I can do, and the things that I'm able to do. And then finally, get back in the game. One of the most fragile places in our lives is when we have just failed, because it's very easy to feel like it's hopeless and to want to fail again. So here I'm encouraging you, never mind what happened, just get back on it, get back off the bench and play your hardest, because the game's still on. So that's the things that we do after we faced a difficult time. Well, I've shared with you a whole lot of different options, and you may have come up with some others, and maybe in a year or two I'll have some new ones that I haven't thought of. Please listen to what I'm going to say very carefully. Do not even think about trying to apply all of these principles or ideas or strategies in your life all at once. Don't do it. You'll have a nervous breakdown. But prayerfully look at each of these categories and choose one from each perhaps, or a couple, and just one at a time start applying these and see which ones work. It may be necessary after a period of months to add a couple more. Maybe there will be a couple that indeed did not work and you'll take them off your plate. I have a habit where every year I review how I'm doing with certain areas of my life, and I revisit my strategies, and in some cases I say, well, this is no longer necessary, or this is not working, I need to do something else, and I ask God for help in trying to figure out how I should go about for the next year in dealing with these issues. So that's going to be your story too. Ask God how to do that. But try the things that I've suggested as God leads you and see how they work. And be ready for needing new strategies as time goes on. So this is my story. It's not your story. And certainly I would not want to tell you that you need to just to do the things the way I did them. Let God lead you and show you what's going to work for you. But my prayer is that this is helpful and that you're able to more intentionally and more successfully resist temptations that come our way. Thank you, and God bless you.